Second book of Samuel, session 38. And we start with 2 Samuel chapter 21. So today, this session is all about unfinished business. And while there is unfinished business in your life, in your marriage, in your history, in your past, as long as there's unfinished business, there's going to be famine in your life, like there was famine. There was famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of Yahuwah, and Yahuwah answered, "This famine is because of Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites." So when we read this interesting historical event of the 3 years famine, and David, it's not his fault. Saul slew or killed the Gibeonites. It's not David's fault, but yet the country is suffering. Nature, the world, the earth is carrying the bloody curses of unfinished business and unresolved issues and unforgiveness. What a deep lesson for our own lives we find in this chapter today. So, who was these Gibeonites? God said this horrible 3-year famine is because Saul killed the Gibeonites. So, who was the Gibeonites? And there was a famine that afflicted the country, the whole of Israel, for 3 consecutive years. David was told by a prophet that the famine was a divine punishment for a terrible sin that King Saul committed against the Gibeonites. But we are not sure exactly what it was. Can we remember from past text? So let's go back a little bit in time, all the way back to Joshua. The Gibeonites first appeared in ancient Israelite history when they obtained a covenant with the people of Israel through false pretenses. This was in the session we did on Joshua chapter 9, verse 3 and 15. If you can remember how, this story was that they came from a distant country and then they pretended that they are hungry. They even showed Joshua their torn, dirty, worn out clothes. They showed Joshua their stale, dry bread, and their water holders were empty. And they said they came from a very far country. Can Joshua please make a peace covenant with them? And then remember, Joshua didn't go to ask of Yahuwah, what must he do? He just believed them because they knew they were actually not from far away. They were from within Israel, from the country that God said to Joshua, kill and destroy all these people and cleanse the country from the Nephilim bloodlines. And they pretended to be from a far country. And they said, just for in case we know God is with you, we know that you are very strong. So just make a peace covenant with us. We are no threat to you. So Joshua believed them, of course. And Joshua promised them on oath that they will not fight them. And of course, when the Israelites discovered that they've been fooled, they were very angry, but they could not go back upon their covenant. Because your yes must be yes and your no must be no, Yeshua says in Matthew 5, verse 37. So finally, a way out was found by making the Gibeonites like servants, if you read Joshua chapter 9. So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for the temple and for Israelite service. They couldn't, of course, just be left alone. They were made servants, but neither could they be destroyed because of the covenant. And God's people always must be serious about their covenants. So this is who the Gibeonites were, if you can remember back from Joshua. So this alliance with the Gibeonites lasted for centuries until Saul, and we see here, let's read verse 2. The king called the Gibeonites and said unto them, now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but they were a remnant of the Amorites. And the Amorites were, out of them even came a lot of giants. And this is what God said you had to destroy. But the children of Israel had sworn unto them. But Saul sought to slay them, to kill them in his zeal for the children of Israel and Judah. So you remember also we spent a lot of time how Saul was an absolute beautiful man, this beautiful king who was such a messianic picture, but then turned into a anti-Christ, anti-messianic symbol. But when he was still in his prime of his life, where he had a zeal for God and a zeal for Israel, he wanted to destroy the Gibeonites. And Saul decided the ancient covenant that Gibeon had with Israel was no longer binding. But what did Saul actually do to the Gibeonites? So Saul had a sound state reason for his action. Why? Because the Gibeonites, like they were pretending to be from a far country in Joshua, remember, they were actually occupying land in the center of Israelite country. In the very center of the Israelite kingdom. And Saul was unable to conquer, of course, that part of Israel land, and he wasn't able to conquer Jerusalem, but he was in a position to push out the Gibeonites. But from the Gibeonites' side, they didn't consider themselves to be strangers anymore. They were holding their part of their alliance with Israel. And they thought of themselves, sort of as part of Israel, their slaves, doing the temple service. Later on in history, they continued to be part of Israel, although only in their capacity as temple slaves. And as you read through the rest of the Bible, they later became known as the Netinim, meaning that they give themselves as servants to the temple. They even went into the Babylonian exile and returned with the rest of the exiles to Judea, the Netinim, the temple servants. And I don't know, maybe out of them came the temple Pharisees. I don't know. But anyway, however, besides the fact that Gibeon never went against their covenant. They never stood up to fight against Israel. Saul looked upon them with suspicion, for they appeared, of course, not like his own people. And the Bible doesn't really tell us a lot, but maybe Saul offered to move them peaceably into another territory, out of the center of the Israelite kingdom. But of course, the Gibeonites refused. Not only was their ancient covenant holding firm and strong, but they were doing their service to Israel in a good way. There was no conflict between them, and they also fell back on their ancient covenant with Joshua that Saul had no right to break, of course. And it was then that Saul forcibly evicted them from their cities. Obviously, many Gibeonites were killed when they resisted Saul, and the rest were dispersed into various areas of the country. So, this is now that God says it's because of Saul's bloody house, because he killed the Gibeonites. And for Father Yahuwah, because there was a covenant made by his servant Joshua, he expects us to keep our covenant. Therefore, David said unto the Gibeonites, verse 3, what shall I do for you? And wherewith will I make atonement, so that you can bless the inheritance of Yahuwah? What is the inheritance of Yahuwah? I hope you're doing some of my other Bible studies, but that is Israel. We are Israel. If you come back to God and you cling to Him and you obey Him and you love Him, then He makes you part of His nation, Israel, and you grafted into the olive tree. So Israel is the inheritance of Yahuwah. And David needs to make atonement. Atonement is only made by blood. Yom Kippur is all about the blood of the goat. In the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, so that the blood can cover the sin. So here David wants to make atonement. Maybe he's hoping they're not going to ask for my blood. I'm not from the lineage of Saul. It wasn't my fault. But blood needs to be spilled, unfortunately, to cover this multitude of sins, so that atonement can be made and the Gibeonites can bless Israel, and this terrible famine can come to an end. So the Gibeonites said, we do not want money. We don't want silver nor gold from the house of Saul, nor of his descendants. Neither for us that you will kill any man of Israel. So they are quite negotiable at this stage. And, David is becoming a little bit more relaxed. So he says, what is it then that I can do for you? And they answered the king, the man that consumed us, the man that devised against us that we should be destroyed and that we should not remain in the kingdom of Israel. So they are referring back to where Saul didn't allow them to be part of Israel kingdom any longer, although Joshua made a covenant with him. So they want the blood to come from this man, not from David or from any other man of Israel. No, but from Saul. So they're asking in verse 6, let 7 of his men be delivered unto us, and we will hang them unto Yahuwah in Gibeah of Saul, whom Yahuwah have chosen. This is horrible. But look at the number of the covenant. Always 7. 7 is just all over the place. So yeah, being true and loyal to how God makes his covenant. I know the Sabbath is a covenant, the 7 feast days is a covenant. We went through all of that with Amasa, who didn't keep the Moedim, the appointed times covenant, who didn't take it serious. So the Gibeonites are taking it, slightly more serious. And they're asking for 7 of Saul's descendants so that they can be hanged. And they can basically then serve as atonement for this curse. It sounds horrible. This is, of course, not Yahuwah's will or what he said, but because we have to be, our yes must be our yes and our no must be our no, we must keep our covenants. Yahuwah is allowing all of this to happen. And David said, I will give them. But of course, David had a covenant with Jonathan because he spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath of Yahuwah that was between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So here, David, he is giving his yes to be yes to the Gibeonites, but at the same time, he's going to remain his yes to be yes towards Jonathan. So he's going to give 7 sons of Saul, but not Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. So the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Ahiah, whom she bore unto Saul, Armoni and Mephibosheth. So this is another Mephibosheth. They probably had just had the same name. So 2 of the sons of Rizpah that she had with Saul, and then 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adrihal, the son of Barzillai, the Meholatite. So remember, Michal was the first wife of David, but then Saul gave her away, remember. So 2 of Rizpah's sons and 5 of Michal's sons from the lineage of Saul. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them in the hill before Yahuwah. And they fell all 7 together, and were put to death in the day of the harvest, in the first day, in the beginning of the barley harvest. So this just reminds me of, when the Pesach season starts. And Rizpah, the daughter of Ahiah, took sackcloth and spread it for her upon the rock, from the beginning of harvest, until water dropped upon them out of heaven, and suffered neither the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. So, I can just imagine, oh, shame. Sometimes things in the Bible are difficult to understand. But here, Rizpah, after David has brought peace over Israel, she maybe started to become a little bit more relaxed, not stressing and being fearful that David is going to take vengeance on the house of Saul. So she probably never expected David to take her 2 sons and let them be hanged by the Gibeonites. You can just imagine a mother's heartbreak for this. So from the time of the beginning of the barley harvest until it started raining again, I'm not 100% sure how long that is, but that's the amount of time that Rizpah, normally when you are mourning, you will put sackcloth on yourself. But here she put sackcloth on the rock. And maybe she sat herself on the rock or next to the rock, and she was guarding her own pain and her mourning over the sackcloth by not allowing anything, not birds during the day or any animals during the night, to come onto the sackcloth. And it was told to David what Rizpah, the daughter of Ahiah, the concubine of Saul, was doing. So David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, his son, from the men of Jabesh Gilead, which had stolen them from the street of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them, when the Philistines had killed Saul in Gilboa. So you remember, um, when Saul went into battle with the Philistines, the previous night he went to the witch of Endor, remember? And then that demon answered him to say, "You're going to be killed tomorrow, you and your son." So the next day they were indeed killed by the Philistines. Oh, basically, Saul committed suicide. And then the Philistines took him and Jonathan's bodies and they hanged them. And you'll remember they also decapitated them. So then the brave men of Jabesh Gilead, the brave men of David, went at night to steal the bodies of Saul and Jonathan and out of Bethshan, the house of the sun god. So they were brought back to Jabesh Gilead. So now David wants to maybe somehow bring closure. This is even another unfinished business. So maybe he wants to bring closure even to Rizpah, and he brings Saul and Jonathan's body, the remaining bones he brings back. And he brought up from there the bones of Saul and of Jonathan his son, and they gathered the bones of them that were hanged. So here comes grandfather Saul's bones, and then father Jonathan, and then of course, all the other sons that was born in the house of Saul, the 7 that was hanged. So all their bodies, all their bones, at that stage, many times, maybe like Saul was burned, he was cremated. His bones were left behind. I don't know whether these 7 boys were hanged in the same way as Saul and whether they were cremated as well, but here the bones of them were collected. And the bones of Saul and Jonathan, his son, buried they in the country of Benjamin in Zelah, in the sepulchre of Kish, his father. So beautifully, David finishes this unfinished business. And he brings closure to this whole episode by bringing Saul 360 degrees back to his father's house and burying him there, as well as his son Jonathan, as well as the 7 sons of the house of Saul that was killed here by the Gibeonites. And when all of this was done, and when they performed all that the king commanded, then God was entreated for the land. Then they could go to God and they could entreat him, plead with him, please restore, bring restitution to the land that is going through this famine for 3 years. We have finished all the unfinished business. And the same for your life. I'm hoping we can find some lessons here. There might still be unfinished business, covenants you've made that was broken, where you had to bring atonement and you didn't, where you had to bring restitution to somebody that might have been hurt, even if it's not your fault that they were hurt. Like Rizpah, it wasn't David's fault that she's hurt, but David also tried to bring restitution for her by bringing all the bodies back and letting them sleep in the graves of their family's land. So you want to entreat God for, asking him to fix something in your life. David wanted God to fix the famine in the land of Israel, but there was unfinished business. You should also maybe have a little bit of a personal journey. Go to the tabernacle, start at the altar, go and spend time there, sacrificing, dying to yourself, giving yourself as a living sacrifice, asking Yahuwah to show you when you look in the mirror of the water of the wash basin, to show him what is unfinished business that you need to restitute and atone for before you can have an answer on the famine in your life or in your marriage or in whatever situation you are going through. I'm hoping this means something for somebody out there. And if you agree with me, then you say, Imuna, Amen. And I'll see you tomorrow.